let me start off by talking a little bit about my personal history, which was touched upon very briefly. I was born in Beirut in 1979, and right away, I know what you're thinking, oh my God, Beirut, because there's that horrible stereotype associated with Beirut. And that's actually something that I've had to live with most of my life here, living in the United States. Whenever you mention Beirut, the first thing that pops to your mind is what? You know, terrorism, violence, and all these things. So that's one of those stereotypes that, you know, I try to, you know, challenge. And another thing I actually wanted to show you was, for those of you guys who are interested, this was supposed to be the original cover of my book, right? But, you know, we decided to change it to go back to the other one. So now, I'm going to show you guys some slides from the book, because I know not everybody here has seen it. So hopefully it'll help illustrate a little bit what I'm talking about. Like I said, I was born in Beirut in 1978, and not a lot of people are familiar with that country, but in 1975, a very violent civil war broke out, and my parents wanted to leave, so they wanted to escape the civil war, so they came here in 1979. So when they came, I was only a year old, okay? The funny thing about that is, even though I was a year old when my parents came, and I grew up my whole life here, and spoke mainly English and was basically Americanized, I still had to go through the process of becoming a citizen, right? And I talk about that a little bit in the book. And that was a really eye-opening experience, because I learned a lot of the things that immigrants from other parts of the world have to go to. So, you know, it brought me a little closer to understanding sort of the plight of the immigrants, which is something that I think is very important these days, obviously. Here I have another slide. Obviously, so, you know, my parents are immigrants, and in a lot of ways they're typical immigrants. And I'm sure many of you guys here have parents who are immigrants. So it's a very familiar story. Once they came to this country, they came with very few, not a lot of money, not a lot of resources. They started a business, they saved up their money, and of course, what's the dream of most immigrants? To save your money and buy that house in the suburbs. And that's exactly what they did. They bought a house in a mostly white suburb. So we were the strange new family that came to the block. Eventually that changed, but we were the first ones. We were kind of the path breakers. And we weren't welcomed right off the bat, right? Especially because the one thing that I thought was strange is, in this slide down here, that actually happened. We were playing next door in our neighbor's yard, because, you know, they had big yards. And we're just little kids. And I remember the neighbor came out to us and said, you know, why don't you guys get the hell out of here? Go back to Lebanon, right? And I was just a kid. But the one thing that I always remembered, and still remember, is how did he know we were from Lebanon, right? Because I'm still curious about that. So obviously there was some kind of gossip or something happening. Now the sad thing about all this, and the funny thing, I guess, is living in the United States as a young American man, I really loved movies, and I was a big fan of Rambo, okay? Chuck Norris, you know, all of those B movies. I love those action movies, but the one thing that really started to turn me off on them was when I saw the film Delta Force. I don't know if you guys have seen that film, but the way that they depict Arabs in that movie is incredibly racist. So right off the bat, I had a conflict, right? On the one hand, I really love these action movies, but on the other hand, they're showing me and my people in this horrible, you know, very negative light. And so that, in a lot of ways, illustrate that struggle that a lot of, I think, Arabs or Muslims or other people go through in this country. And so when I was younger, I was really gung-ho about the military. I wanted to fight in the army. I wanted to be a soldier. And, you know, the Rambo movies really indoctrinated me on that. With that, you know, I wanted to be, have honor and defend my country and wear a uniform and everything. But as I got older, I started to realize that if I was going to join the army, there's a really strong likelihood that they're going to probably send me to the Middle East to you know, kill fellow Arabs, and that was something that really didn't appeal to me at all. So obviously, I didn't join. All right, and another thing, you know, growing up as a teenager in, you know, high school and then in junior high school, I started to, you know, when I was young, I didn't think of myself as different. I thought I was just a kid. And it wasn't until other people pointed that out to me, right? It was pointed out to me that I was different than everyone else and that I don't belong. Because you don't think. You think you're just an ordinary kid. You're going to go sit down with the kids and eat lunch. You're going to go to the classroom, right, and just be a kid. But then there, slowly but surely, these small and subtle ways or incidents started to happen where it was emphasized to me that I was someone else that didn't belong here. And oftentimes people ask me about this cartoon down there, if that's real. If you can see the cartoon, that cartoon was posted up in my high school teacher's classroom, right? He actually had this cartoon displayed up there, and it's an American soldier pointing a gun at, you know, a stereotypical Arab who's cowering behind a bunch of oil wells. And so, you know, here I am, an Arab, sitting in the classroom with a bunch of other kids, and that cartoon is up there. And, you know, it's humiliating. It was something that I didn't appreciate at all. And then I started to think a little bit, how could he do that? How is there nobody upset about that, right? And these are just small examples from my personal life. And I'm sure many of you have examples from your lives too, which, you know, we could probably talk more about during the question and answer. And of course, the horrible stereotypes that predominate in our media, in our popular culture, that nobody really challenges, at least not in the mainstream. And the interesting thing is, I think that I've been called a spick more than anything else, even though I'm obviously not a Latino. So I've been called a whole bunch of names. You know, my worst enemy growing up on television was Apu. Right? I don't know how many times I was confused for Indian or called a Hindu. People don't really know. They didn't understand what an Arab is. And even today, it's something that's very confusing to a lot of people. And so in my book, I try to tell people what exactly an Arab is. I try to, you know, help people understand what it means to be, what is the definition of that ethnicity. And also another sort of story that helped me notice that I was different, and this is, again, also in the book, was, you know, obviously I had dark skin, and I went to a mostly white school. And, you know, you never hold a mirror up and stand next to your friends and compare skin color, right? I didn't do that. But there was one time when we were videotaped performing a play, and then they showed the play on in the classroom, and that was the first time I realized that I had dark skin. I saw myself on the screen, right? And it was a really big awakening moment for me to understand that. To, you know, and that's, I think, something that a lot of people go through, is that, you know, you don't think that you're different until it's pointed out to you that you are different. And I know a lot of people are saying that things are changing. You know, Barack Obama was elected, so racism is dead and over, right? But I do think, on the other hand, that this country, and a place like Chicago especially, is becoming more and more diverse. And I think that's actually a good thing. So, you know, not everybody's going to have similar experiences that I did growing up. And of course, there's another element that I wanted to discuss, is being embarrassed and then being ashamed of who you are. Now, you know, your natural reaction when you're told that you're different and you don't belong here is to try to fit in, try to belong. And oftentimes that takes the form of concealing or hiding who you are, right? And that's something that I did, and I'm sure many people in this room probably have done. Because they want to fit in, they don't want to say that they're Arabs. They want to hide their culture, or they're ashamed of their culture. I remember my mom used to play Kulthum all the time, and Kulthum is a very popular, famous Arabic singer. She used to play it in the car and blast it all the time. And it was very embarrassing for me. Imagine yourself being a 13, 14-year-old kid. And so there was one time that we were in a parking lot, and I saw one of my friends from high school. And, you know, I tried to turn it off very quickly before he could see me in the car listening to this music. So obviously, as time went by, I stopped, you know, being ashamed of my culture and my heritage, and in fact started to be proud of my culture and my heritage. And I'll talk more about that in a second. There's a couple of things that really helped to shape the way that I think. And one of them was going to college, okay? I think, obviously, there's a lot of young people in this room. Getting an education, I know you've heard it a million times, but I think it's very important. And it was in college that I sort of became more aware of my culture, my heritage, and more importantly,